Hey, welcome to Questions Just Asked. This was supposed to be a temporary broadcast back during the pandemic to stay in connection with people, and somehow it's turned into a permanent one, a semi-permanent one. Now, we will only broadcast this as long as I have questions. Right now, I'm using a book that asks questions about the Bible. They're great questions. They may really make me think. They really work my mind, which is good. I need to be worked. But I'm starting to run out of questions. If you have questions, please email them to John at hopelowcountry.org. That's John at hopelowcountry.org, and I'll make sure I answer it. If you want to know what day they're going to be answered, just put on the email. Please let me know when this is going to be answered, and I'll send you the date that we're going to address it. We only address one question at a time. So let's get to it, won't we? Don't we? Will we? Whatever. One of those days. How do we reconcile the Old Testament command for vengeance, an eye for an eye, with Jesus' command to turn the other cheek and love your enemies? Great question. It can seem like it's at conflict with one another. They seem to be opposite commands, do they not? Well, let's stop. Let's slow down for a minute and talk about some things. There was a lot of anger and vengeance in Jesus' day, just as there is today. Much extended beyond an eye for an eye concept. That's just the way it was in that day and time, as it is in today's time. Man, do something against somebody now and watch what's going to happen to you. All sorts of things could go nuts. But so there's a lot of man's way is one of vengeance, one of anger, and also the concept of eye for an eye was a limiting the retaliation for a crime. Uh, if you can imagine, let's suppose somebody was peeping tom on their neighbor's wife, and she was naked in the stream taking a bath in that day, and he got caught. Well, pluck the eye out. That's a lesser vengeance than let's kill him. We don't remember. We forget that. There's something else you also got to remember, that in those days, the concept of eye and eye was believed to be true, but seldom carried out. You didn't see too many people walk around with their eyes plucked out. The gospel, in the meantime, is the redemptive way to seek retaliation. It's the way that of life and not death and destruction. It's a gospel of good news that has been turning the other cheek. There's no better way than to seek retaliation than to love someone. Love your enemies. Wow. Now that's something different. Loving them. I remember my dad would discipline me, and I expected to get a spanking just about every time Dad had to discipline me. But when he didn't spank me, when he actually spoke softly to me, it made me think much more about things than it did if I got what I deserved. Jesus does not eliminate the law; he embraces it and extends it out to be loved, the people to be loved in their sin. We don't think about that, do we? We won't say, "Oh, there's two opposites. The Bible's messed up. It's got two different commands." No, one deals with the way man deals with things, eye for an eye. The other is Jesus' way of dealing with things. In the end, it's a heart issue. Jesus says redemption comes another way than just being vengeful. And Jesus says that redemption doesn't come through vengeance, but rather through love. Man, have you ever had somebody that did something against you and you just put a loving on them? It probably more deeper and heartfelt addressed than if you gave them what they deserve. Not that they don't deserve it. Let's be honest. Love probably has a greater impact than vengeance and anger brought about in retaliation, if you love them well. Jesus even told us to love our enemies, that when they slap you on the one cheek, to turn the other cheek to them. When they ask for a coat, give them two. Maybe it's something we need to learn about, especially in this day and age when Israel is being attacked by the Hamas and crazy things are happening and children are being killed. What would it be if we figured out how to love people? There was a time in the church I was at years ago, many years ago, and there was a gentleman on the elder board who wanted a position paper on a certain sin. I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to get everybody fired up. And I remember saying to him, I said, "Sir, We don't need another position paper. We know it's wrong. What I need to know is how about somebody write a position paper about how do we love someone in that sin? How do we show them the love of Christ? Because I tell you what, we don't have enough position papers about how to love someone in sin, do we? We like position papers stating our stance against it, but how do we love somebody? How do we love them and not the sin? That's the big question. Well, love them. Jesus says, love your enemy. He doesn't say love your enemy unless. He doesn't say love your enemy, but. What would it be? I can remember a missionary years when I was a little boy. I was probably about, I guess I was about 13, 14 years old. He was preaching about being a missionary in India. And he said, India can be won for Christ if we would just go over to India and love people. And I can remember that to this day. If we would just go to India and truly love people. What is it to love your enemy? What is it to love someone that's done something against you? What is it to turn that other cheek? Not because you want to avoid a conflict, but because it's really love. It's a good question. Do we really believe that love can change the way? I believe it. Do you? Maybe there's somebody you need to go and say, listen, I'm sorry. I should have been loving you instead of being angry and vengeful against you. I've had to do that recently. It makes a big difference. So, hey, it seems like it's opposite commands. One is in response to what man does. One is the opposite of what God does. Think about what Jesus said to do. Now, do you believe it'll change people's hearts? That's the question. Hey, thanks for being with me. We're going to be looking at a question next week. Let's see if Courtney puts it up there or she holds it out on me. Courtney, how do we reconcile the two different creation stories presented in Genesis chapters 1 and 2? That's the question for next week. You got to come back next week to get it. And I hope to see you next week.